In the middle of 18th century London, in the middle of the 18th century, London boasted only two playhouses, Covent Garden, run by John Rich, and Drury Lane, managed by David Garrick. In 1749, the competition between these two men erupted in rival productions of Romeo and Juliet.
Notwithstanding Mr. Garrick's utmost attention to please his principal actors and to keep them in constant good humor, he found that jealousy and rivalship would frequently interrupt that tranquility he wished to establish. Barry complained that he was called upon to act at improper seasons and on unlucky days, such as when a great lady had summoned a prodigious company to a concert of music, or a rout, or upon an opera night, or when some public assembly was announced. Mr. Garrick, to comply with this humor, desired him to choose his own days, but even that compliance did not produce the desired effect. Garrick's Hamlet still drew larger crowds than Barry's, but this, indeed, was a misfortune which Garrick was not anxious to remove. Mrs. Cibber, too, who naturally sympathized with the most affecting lover of the stage, had particular objections to the manager's conduct, respecting those plays in which she acted principal parts. These discontents of Barry and Mrs. Cibber broke out at first into murmurs, into pettish and peevish complaints, and at last ended in their revolt from Drury Lane to Covent Garden. In the summer of 1749, they became hired servants of Mr. Rich, who gave them what they principally wished for, the power of getting up what plays they pleased, and of choosing what parts they would condescend to act. Thus was ambition satisfied for some time, at least. Full of resentment for supposed injuries, and with a determined resolution to vanquish the little tyrant of Drury Lane, Mr. Barry and Mrs. Cibber took the field at Covent Gardens pretty early in October 1749, with a play in which they were much and justly admired. Romeo and Juliet had raised their reputation for scenes of tender love and pathetic distress to a very high degree. The public in general were greatly prepossessed in their favor. They imagined that those characters, after being represented by them, could not be tolerably filled by any other performers. However, Mr. Garrick was not terrified with the threatenings of the Grand Confederacy of Covent Garden. He instructed Miss Bellamy, a young actress of merit, whose person was elegant and whose voice, when well regulated, sufficiently harmonious, in the part of Juliet. Romeo he studied with great accuracy, and under the disadvantages of giving his original idea of the part to Mr. Barry. As he was always remarkably active and diligent in business, and secret in all his stage operations, he opposed the other house on the very first night of their acting Romeo and Juliet. He managed so well that he divided the opinions of the public upon the merits of the performers. Much idle criticism was thrown into the prints by the partisans of the rival actors. In the meantime, the town was obliged to take up with one play at both theaters for 12 days successively. At last, Mrs. Cibber's strength failing, another was given out. Mr. Garrick, if he did not absolutely conquer the enemy, kept the field. Though the public ran in crowds at first to decide upon the merits of the actors in this tragedy, yet many were justly angry at being obliged either to see one play repeatedly, or to give up the diversions of the theater for almost a fortnight. It was observed that the managers got no emolument by the contest, for they often played to thin audiences, or such as were made up by art. Those who came from the country, either on business or on pleasure, and proposed only to stay a short time in town, had still more reason to complain. The following epigram, which alludes very happily to an incidental speech of Mercutio in the play, was printed during the struggle for theatrical preeminence. "Well, what's tonight?" says angry Ned, as up from bed he rouses. "Romeo again," and shakes his head. "A pox on both your houses."